representation, which results in actual or potential harm to the child's health, survival, and development or dignity. This may be true for some children, but unfortunately it is the government that is emotionally abusing, neglecting, commercially exploiting, and exposing thousands of children to greater risk of sexual abuse when they remove a child from a loving family on hearsay or erroneous grounds. If a child discloses abuses, e.g. versions of rape or abuse, to his or her grandparents, parent, or to a psychologist or doctor, it is likely the child will not be believed by magistrates and judges. In many cases, the child's legal representative, the independent child lawyer, will go against the child too. Australia is a signatory to the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, which recognises the rights derived from inherent dignity, that everyone has the right to liberty and security of person. No one shall be deprived of his liberty, in this Article 9, and all are equal before the law and entitled, without any discrimination, to equal protections of the law, Article 26. Article 9 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child ensures that a child shall not be separated from his or her parents against their will. In state child protection laws, the safety of a child is of paramount consideration, but I now believe Australian children have no rights. They are not listened to, and they have little or no say on their lives. The convention and treaties Australia has signed to protect children are meaningless. A warning to any parents out there: if you report child sexual abuse in Australia, there is the likelihood that you will lose your children. You need to seek the right help. To the normal person, this sounds so bizarre and nonsensical. And if your newborn gets injured, it is very likely when you go to hospital, those good parents are accused of child abuse. In many cases, it is the default position, and I've spoken to some of these parents. The actions of forcibly removing a child from the parents are traumatic and disorientating, and the consequences of separating a child from a loving relationship are one of the most extreme forms of psychological abuse to that child. Would a young child's brain be able to distinguish a forced removal experience from a kidnapping? Pediatrics Professor Charles Nelson from Harvard Medical School in the USA spoke about this in the Washington Post. What separation from parents does to children, the effect is catastrophic, he said. There's so much research on this that if people paid attention at all to the science, they would never do it. Some children need rescuing, and removal might bring relief, but because some children were rescued from screwed up parents does not justify the extreme collateral damage to all the other children through this policy. Yet removal is the default solution of the government. They are using an extreme form of abuse to resolve the possibility of abuse. My book refers to the thousands of children that were screaming or pleading to remain in their home or placement. I contend the Australian federal and state governments are hooked on the service economy of exploiting children, i.e. the child removals business. Put simply, it's a jobs and growth industry, and it is now a multi-billion-dollar asset to the economy. I characterize it as a malignancy that erodes the very fabric of society through the destruction of family and father and motherhood. As a society, our leaders need to come to terms with this addiction to the protection racket and stop accepting cruel actions, flagrant corruption and malfeasance as normal operating consequences. Let me cite an example of how authorities did not protect but rather punished a child. This child I call Ella in the book had disclosed sexual abuse, that is, forms of torture, rape and hurt, by her father and others to a number of professionals over 3 years and in detail to a police officer. Nothing was ever done. It was Friday around lunchtime, and her father was to pick her up from school for a weekend visitation. Obviously frightened and realizing authorities were not helping her, the young girl then bravely spoke out to a new teacher, detailing some of the harrowing details and an injury that she had recently suffered. The teacher was obligated to report the matter to CARL, that is, the Crisis Abuse Report Line. The policewoman, who I've named in the book, had listened to the worst sexual abuse disclosures a few months before. but she had lied in her entries that the child had made nil disclosures. But she was ready that afternoon and on the phone to the principal, urging that the child be sent back home with her abuser. It was only 18 months later it was discovered that she had concealed all of the child's sexual abuse disclosures. What happened to her? She was promoted. What happened to the teacher? I read a note that indicated the education department obviously considered that listening to the child's sexual abuse disclosures was distressing for the staff member, so I believe the teacher was offered counselling and time off. But what happened to the child? Ella was punished. She was ultimately removed through deception from her protective mother for bravely speaking out, and Ella has never been allowed to return home. Though many good people strive to help and protect children, on the flip side, there are the so-called protection apparatus. Others are emboldened within the system to exploit children because there is a monetary value in doing so. I believe tens of thousands of children have been betrayed by the state. This is a war against family and parents, father and motherhood to their children. From all the horrific accounts I've heard, I do not believe for a second in the fuzzy language from the government child department sites. Any Australian voter is familiar with the government mantra, jobs and growth. In 2007, the number of children in out-of-home care was 5.8 to 1 to every 1,000 children. This has now risen to 8 per 1,000. It's become obvious that the more children under state guardianship, the more jobs are created and the more tax required to deliver the ever-increasing salaries, services, fees and profits. And it seems First Nation families are easy targets. About 45% of the 14,723 children in out-of-home care in New South Wales are Aboriginal. The term child trafficking conjures up images of African children between the ages of 8 and 14 being trucked across the border to work in the cocoa plantations, for example. The worth of each child could be determined by the labour output, which might be valued at $5 to $8 a day. These earnings derive from the sale of cocoa. I suggest a more profitable option of trafficking children is through a sophisticated remove and place government program. There is no complex sale of merchandise, as the children are the merchandise. The income is sourced and derived from the taxpayer, and ingeniously there is no limiting factor for the industry, and the more children in the program, the bigger the budgets awarded. Each child brought in the system becomes an asset, a financial unit, as they are termed in the state financial books. It's become a multi-billion-dollar industry. One has to wonder why so many foster children, now adults, describe how they were moved from one foster home to the next until they finally exited the system. Was this because there's a broker's fee every time a child is moved to a new foster home? I have been told the fee is more under an emergency removal and could be as much as $30,000. Foster parents have a meaningful participation in society, but I have heard of the most horrific accounts from good foster parents describing how the department removed their foster child or children under the most extraordinary and disgraceful circumstances, and how the children were greatly harmed, confused and humiliated by removing them from their caring foster homes. I detail this in a chapter called The Garbage Bag Children. Many mechanisms are in place to facilitate unwarranted removals from vulnerable or struggling parents. A vulnerable single mother might lose her baby at a birthing hospital with the department claiming of abnormal blood samples. Parents are reported to CPS for simply not presenting to a doctor before 13 weeks when pregnant. And parents can lose all their children because one child has a medical condition which the department claims is from abuse or neglect. These unwarranted removals make little sense until one considers these children are just merchandise to an industrial complex benefiting financially from a remove and place program, i.e. the trading of kids. Profits and salaries are justified and enhanced by expanding traffic in product, and many on big salaries. Many child advocates